The evening had settled in with that particular kind of quiet that always made me feel a little restless. It was the kind of quiet where the hum of the refrigerator seemed to amplify and the ticking of the clock on the mantel felt like a drumbeat. I was sprawled on my couch, a half-read book slipping from my fingers, the dim glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the living room. Life, at that moment, felt comfortably mundane, a warm blanket I'd grown accustomed to. Then my phone buzzed, a sharp, insistent sound that broke the stillness. It was Liam. "Hey, man." His voice was a low rumble on the other end, a sound that always managed to cut through my internal monologue. "Hope I'm not disturbing you. I'm in a bit of a situation." Liam, my neighbor. The guy with the laugh that could make you forget your troubles and eyes the color of a stormy sea. We'd known each other for about a year. A friendship forged over shared backyard fences, borrowing tools, and the occasional shared pizza on a Friday night. He was, well, he was Liam, uncomplicated and yet somehow profoundly complex. "What kind of situation?" I asked, pushing myself up to a more upright position. My ears were already perked, a familiar curiosity piqued. Liam's situations were rarely boring. Remember that charity auction thing tonight? The one downtown?" "Yeah, the one for the animal shelter. You were going, right?" "Supposed to be," he said, a faint sigh escaping him. "But my shirt, my good shirt, it's indisposed. I spilled something on it. Something bright red and probably permanent." I chuckled. "Sounds like you. What did you do, wear it while wrestling a tomato?" "Funny," he deadpanned. "Look, the thing is, it's the only decent shirt I have that's clean and presentable. Everything else is either wrinkled beyond recognition or has a hole in it somewhere inconvenient." I could picture him, I'm sure, standing in his apartment, surveying a chaotic pile of laundry with that familiar, exasperated expression. "So, what am I, your personal stylist now?" "More like a benevolent garment dispenser," he countered smoothly. "I was hoping, maybe you'd have something I could borrow. Something that might fit." I considered it. My wardrobe wasn't exactly extensive, but I did have a few shirts that weren't entirely worn out. Most of them were pretty basic, not exactly fashion statements. "Borrow a shirt? Liam, what are you planning on doing at this auction? Impressing the canapes?" "Just looking to make a good impression, and it's not like I'm going to be the only one there in a nice shirt. I'd be eternally grateful. I can bring it back first thing tomorrow. Promise." He paused. "And I'll even bring coffee. The good stuff." The good stuff. Liam knew my weaknesses. He knew I was a sucker for a good deed, especially when it involved a potential reward of excellent coffee. And honestly, the thought of him looking sharp, even in borrowed clothes, was appealing. More appealing than I probably should admit. All right, I relented. "Come on over. I'll see what I can find. But don't expect anything designer. It'll probably be a plain blue or something equally thrilling." "You're a lifesaver, Ezekiel," he said, the gratitude genuine. "Be there in 10. I hung up the phone, a strange flutter in my chest that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the neighborly act of lending a shirt. There was something about Liam, a certain energy he brought with him, that always managed to shake up my quiet existence. I walked over to my closet, a small, orderly space filled with more sensible than stylish items. I bypassed the t-shirts and the worn-out sweaters, aiming for the more occasionally presentable section. I settled on a dark gray button-down shirt. It was a good fit, well-made, and neutral enough that it wouldn't clash with anything. It was one of those shirts I rarely wore, mostly because I felt it was a bit too formal for my usual life. As I was folding it neatly, my mind drifted back to Liam. I remembered the first time I saw him, moving into the apartment next door. He'd been wrestling a ridiculously oversized sofa through the doorway, his brow furrowed in concentration, his muscles taut. I'd gone over to offer help, and he'd looked up, his stormy gray eyes meeting mine, and a slow, easy smile had spread across his face. It was a smile that could melt glaciers. He was an artist, he'd told me later, a sculptor, He worked with reclaimed materials, creating these beautiful, intricate pieces that had a raw, honest energy to them. I'd seen some of his work in a local gallery, and it was breathtaking. He had a way of seeing beauty in things others overlooked, a talent that mirrored the way he seemed to see me, too. A soft knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. It was him. I opened the door, and there he stood, looking slightly windswept, his usual easy confidence a little frayed around the edges, but his eyes still held that spark. He was wearing a pair of dark jeans and a slightly rumpled, once white t-shirt that had a faint but noticeable pinkish stain blooming on the front. He looked utterly forlorn. "Hey," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "Looks like you're in dire straits." "Dire is an understatement," he said, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "My nemesis, the rogue cranberry juice." He gestured to his shirt with a grimace. I held out the gray shirt. "Here, it's not much, but it's clean and hopefully fits." He took it, his fingers brushing mine for a fleeting moment. The touch sent a tiny, unexpected jolt through me. He held the shirt up, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "This is perfect, Ezekiel. Seriously, you're a lifesaver. I owe you big time." "Just bring it back tomorrow," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "And don't forget the coffee." "Never," he promised, his eyes meeting mine. "You know, for someone who claims to be so ordinary, you've got excellent taste in borrowed clothing." I felt a warmth creep up my neck. "It's just a shirt, Liam." "It's a very nice shirt," he insisted, already heading towards my spare bathroom to change. "Thank you, really." I waited in the living room, trying to appear nonchalant, but my gaze kept drifting towards the bathroom door. I could hear the rustle of fabric, the quiet sounds of him changing. It was ridiculous, I knew, to be so acutely aware of his presence, but there it was. My mundane evening had taken a decidedly less mundane turn. A few minutes later, he emerged. The gray shirt fit him perfectly. It was more than just fitting, though. On him, it looked right. The fabric draped smoothly over his broad shoulders, accentuating the lean lines of his torso. The understated color made his eyes, those stormy gray eyes, seem even more intense, more captivating. He looked good. Really, really good. He caught me staring, and a slow smile, that signature Liam smile, spread across his face. It wasn't just a polite smile. It was knowing, a little mischievous, and it made my heart do a peculiar little flip. "See," he said, smoothing down the front of the shirt. "Not so bad, right? I clean up all right, with a little help." "You look fine," I managed, my voice a little rougher than I intended. I cleared my throat. "Definitely better than the cranberry juice incident." He chuckled, a low, rich sound that vibrated in the quiet room. "Thanks again. Now I should probably get going. Wouldn't want to be late." He glanced at his watch. "You know, I think I'll make it a quick one. Maybe grab a drink afterwards. If you're not busy, you should join me. My treat for the shirt." My mind raced. Join him? For a drink? The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. My usual Friday nights involved sweatpants and a streaming service. Going out with Liam, especially when he looked like that, felt like stepping into a different orbit. I don't know, Liam," I stammered, feeling myself blush. "I wasn't really planning on going out." He tilted his head, his expression softening. "No pressure, Ezekiel. Absolutely no pressure. Just thought I'd ask. But hey, if you change your mind, you know where to find me." He started to move towards the door. "And the coffee tomorrow morning is still on." As he reached for the doorknob, I blurted out, "Actually, maybe I could join you for a bit. Just a quick one." His eyes lit up, and that smile returned, wider this time. "Really? Great. I'll meet you back here in, say, an hour? Gives me time to get to the auction, and you time to contemplate your dazzling social life." He winked. "Something like that," I said, a genuine smile finally breaking through my nerves. He left, and the apartment suddenly felt a lot quieter, but also charged with an unfamiliar energy. I stood there for a moment, the echo of his laughter still in the air, the faint scent of his cologne lingering. I looked at the empty space where he'd stood, a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation swirling within me. An hour. I had an hour to get ready. And for the first time in a long time, the prospect of getting dressed up, of stepping out of my comfortable routine, felt exhilarating. It all started with a borrowed shirt, a simple, mundane act that had somehow, inexplicably, set my quiet world spinning. I made my way to my bedroom, my mind a whirlwind of possibilities. I wasn't sure what this might lead to, but I knew, with a certainty that surprised me, that I was looking forward to finding out. Liam had a way of making me see things differently, of making me want to see things differently. And as I started to get ready, a single thought kept replaying in my mind. That look in his eyes when he'd first put on my shirt. It was a look that promised more, and for the first time I felt ready to accept it. The air in my small apartment felt suddenly thicker, charged with an energy I couldn't quite name, but definitely felt. Ezekiel stood there, my favorite navy blue t-shirt draped over his broad shoulders, the worn cotton clinging to him in a way that made my breath hitch. It was a t-shirt I'd bought on a whim, one of those ridiculously soft ones that felt like a second skin, and now it was being showcased in a way I'd never imagined. He wasn't just wearing it, he was inhabiting it. He'd been helping me move a ridiculously heavy bookcase, the kind that seems to have a gravitational pull towards the floor, and in the midst of the struggle, my original shirt had snagged on something sharp and ripped. With a sheepish grin, I'd offered him mine, a casual gesture born of necessity. But as he'd pulled it over his head, something shifted. The fabric stretched, revealing the lean musculature of his back, the defined curve of his shoulder blades, and then, when he'd turned to face me, the world seemed to tilt. His eyes, those deep pools of hazel that always managed to hold a hint of amusement and a surprising depth of contemplation, met mine. He wasn't just looking at me. He was looking into me. It was a gaze that lingered, a silent question hanging in the space between us. The usual playful banter, the easy camaraderie we'd built over the past few months, evaporated. In its place was a palpable tension, a humming awareness that made my palms sweat. I tried to force a casual smile, to break the spell, but my lips felt stiff. "Fits you better than it fits me," I managed, my voice a little rougher than I intended. Ezekiel's smile was slow, almost shy, and it did something to my chest. It wasn't a full-blown grin, but a subtle upturn of his lips that hinted at something more, something I was afraid to define. "It's comfortable," he said, his voice a low rumble that resonated through me. He shifted his weight, and the t-shirt moved with him, a silent testament to the way it now belonged to him, at least for the moment. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant hum of city traffic and the thumping of my own heart, which seemed to have found a new, erratic rhythm. I wanted to say something, anything, to fill the void, but the words felt clumsy and inadequate. Instead, I found myself studying him, really studying him, as if seeing him for the first time. The way the fabric stretched across his chest, the subtle swell of his biceps when he moved his arms, the gentle slope of his neck above the collar. It was an intensely intimate observation, and I felt a blush creep up my neck. He was more than just a friend. He was someone I'd found myself looking forward to seeing, someone whose texts I'd reread, whose laugh could instantly brighten my day. We'd met at a local bookshop, both reaching for the same obscure poetry collection, and our conversation had flowed effortlessly from there. He was intelligent, witty, and possessed a quiet kindness that drew me in. But this was different. This was a new layer of vulnerability that had been unearthed. "You okay, Leo?" Ezekiel asked, his voice laced with a subtle concern that chipped away at my composure. I nodded, perhaps a little too quickly. "Yeah, just tired. Moving day, you know?" I gestured vaguely at the half-assembled bookcase, a pathetic excuse that didn't even begin to cover the complex swirl of emotions churning inside me. He didn't look entirely convinced, his gaze still holding mine, searching. You want some water? Or maybe we should just call it a day and finish this tomorrow. The offer was kind, practical, but part of me didn't want him to leave. Not yet. Not with this unaddressed feeling hanging in the air. No, it's fine, I said, forcing a more convincing smile. We're almost there. Just need to get this shelf attached. I turned back to the bookcase, my hands fumbling with a screw, desperate to distract myself. Ezekiel moved closer, his presence a warm weight beside me. He picked up a tool, his movements precise and efficient. As he worked, his arm brushed against mine, and a jolt, like static electricity, coursed through me. I resisted the urge to flinch away, to create distance. Instead, I focused on the steady rhythm of our work, the quiet efficiency of our shared task. "You've got good taste in furniture, Leo," he remarked, his voice back to its usual easy tone, as if the moment of intense connection hadn't happened, or perhaps as if he was deliberately steering us back to safer waters. I let out a small laugh, a genuine one this time. "Thanks. I like things that have a bit of history to them, like this old thing." I patted the side of the bookcase. "It's seen better days, but it's solid." "Just like good friendships," Ezekiel said, and the way he said it, the slight emphasis on friendships, made my heart skip a beat. Was he aware of the subtext? Was he playing a game, or was he feeling it too? We finished attaching the shelf in a companionable silence, the awkwardness from earlier still present but softened by the resumption of our task. As we stood back to admire our handiwork, Ezekiel turned to me again. The t-shirt still clung to him, a constant reminder of the moment that had preceded this. "I should probably get going," he said, his voice a little softer. He reached up and tugged at the hem of the t-shirt, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. "And I should give this back to you." A pang of disappointment shot through me. I hadn't realized how much I'd wanted him to keep wearing it, to carry a piece of my space, my scent, with him. "Oh, right," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "No worries, it's just a shirt." But it wasn't just a shirt anymore. Was it? It had become a symbol, a tangible manifestation of a feeling I was only just beginning to understand. Ezekiel hesitated for a moment, his gaze drifting over my face. Then he slowly began to pull the t-shirt off. The movement was deliberate, unhurried, and as the fabric slid down his arms, I felt a strange sense of anticipation mixed with a hint of regret. The reveal was slow, deliberate. Each inch of exposed skin a small revelation. His skin was warm, tanned, and smooth. The way the t-shirt peeled away revealed the clean lines of his torso, the subtle definition of his abs. And then he stood there, shirtless, the navy blue t-shirt held loosely in his hands. He was even more striking than I'd realized. The sweat from our exertion had left a faint sheen on his skin, and his chest rose and fell with steady breaths. He looked powerful, yet vulnerable, a captivating paradox. He met my eyes again, and this time there was no amusement, no casual deflection. There was something raw and unguarded there, something that mirrored the turmoil in my own chest, the way he stared at me then. It wasn't just curiosity. It was something deeper, something that hinted at a desire I had only dared to fantasize about. He looked like he wanted more than just a borrowed t-shirt, more than just a friendly conversation. He looked like he wanted me. My heart hammered against my ribs. The air in the room crackled with an unspoken energy. I could feel the blood rushing to my face, the heat pooling in my stomach. This was it. The moment where everything could change, or everything could be swept under the rug, leaving behind a lingering, uncomfortable silence. "Leo," he said, his voice barely a whisper, and the way he said my name, so softly, so intently, sent shivers down my spine. He took a step closer, and the distance between us seemed to shrink, the invisible threads of attraction pulling us together. I didn't move. I couldn't. My gaze was locked on his, a silent conversation passing between us, filled with questions and possibilities. The scent of him, a subtle blend of sandalwood and something uniquely his, filled my senses. He lifted the t-shirt as if to hand it to me, but then paused. His eyes, still fixed on mine, flickered down to my lips, then back up. It was a glance so loaded with unspoken meaning, it felt like a caress. He was holding my gaze, and I was holding his, and in that suspended moment, the world outside my apartment ceased to exist. The weight of the unspoken things between us was immense, pressing down, demanding to be acknowledged. He wanted more, and the terrifying, exhilarating truth was so did I. He finally handed me the t-shirt, his fingers brushing against mine. The touch was fleeting, but it left a trail of fire on my skin. "Thanks again," he said, his voice a little hoarse. He pulled on his own shirt, a simple gray one that seemed less impactful, less charged than my borrowed navy blue. But the memory of him in my t-shirt, the way he'd looked at me, was seared into my mind. "Any time," I managed to reply, my voice sounding unnaturally calm, betraying none of the internal storm. He lingered for a moment longer, his gaze still holding mine, a silent promise or perhaps a question mark hanging in the air. Then, with a final, lingering look that made my knees feel weak, he turned and walked towards the door. As the door clicked shut behind him, I stood in the quiet of my apartment, the borrowed t-shirt clutched in my hand. It still held a faint warmth, a ghost of his presence. The air felt thinner now, less charged, but the echo of that intense gaze, that unspoken longing, remained. I looked at the t-shirt, at the faint imprint of his body, still visible in its relaxed drape, and a slow, hopeful smile spread across my face. He looked like he wanted more, and for the first time I felt brave enough to want it too. The weight of unspoken things was still there, but now it felt less like a burden and more like a starting point. The silence in the studio was a living thing, thick and charged, stretching between us like a taut wire. I'd lent him my favorite faded band tee, the one with the barely visible print of a guitar hero I'd obsessed over in high school. It was a stupid, impulsive gesture, born from that dizzying cocktail of late-night conversations and the low hum of the city outside. He'd been shivering, his own jacket long gone, and I'd just done it. Pulled it over his head, the soft cotton settling against his skin, a borrowed warmth. But it wasn't the act of lending the shirt that had left me breathless. It was when he'd peeled it off later, back in his place, the gesture casual, almost an afterthought. The movement was fluid, unhurried, and then his eyes, those impossibly deep, thoughtful eyes, had met mine, and in that moment I saw it. A flicker, a hunger, a raw, undisguised want that mirrored the burgeoning ache in my own chest. It was a look that said, "This isn't enough. I want more." Now, a week later, that look was a phantom limb, a constant, tingling presence. We were back in my studio, the air still smelling faintly of turpentine and stale coffee, a space that usually felt like a sanctuary. But lately, it felt more like a holding pen. Ezekiel was here, ostensibly to finish sketching out designs for the gallery installation, but the work had stalled. The charcoal lay abandoned on the paper, his usual focused intensity replaced by a restless energy that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "You're quiet today," I ventured, my voice a little too loud in the stillness. I was meticulously organizing my paintbrushes, a nervous habit I'd developed over the last few days. Each sweep of my cloth over the bristles was an attempt to regain control, to impose order on the chaos that had taken root within me. He glanced up, a faint smile playing on his lips, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just thinking," he murmured, his gaze drifting out the window to the sliver of blue sky visible between the towering brick buildings, about lines and space, the way things connect or don't. His words were so perfectly Ezekiel, analytical, precise, yet hinting at something deeper. He always found a way to cloak his emotions in intellectual discourse, to abstract his feelings into concepts that were easier to dissect. And I, for my part, was usually adept at deciphering them. But this time, the code felt more complex, the message more urgent, and I was struggling to break it. I remembered the night he'd taken off the shirt, We'd been at a small, dimly lit bar downtown, a place we'd discovered together, a shared secret amongst the city's many vibrant veins. The music had been low, a soulful blues track that seemed to underscore the intimacy of our conversation. We'd talked about everything and nothing: childhood dreams, artistic frustrations, the peculiar loneliness of navigating your late 20s in a city that never slept. And then, the temperature had seemed to climb, not from any external source, but from the palpable shift in the air between us. He'd excused himself to the restroom, and when he returned, the familiar comfort of my band tee was draped loosely over his shoulders. It was an odd sight, seeing my clothes on him, and a surprising jolt had gone through me. It was the familiarity of it, the casualness, that had felt so charged. He'd met my eyes, a question in his, a silent plea for permission. And I'd given it with a nod, a small smile that I hoped masked the sudden flutter in my chest. Later, back at his apartment, the city lights painting abstract patterns on his walls, he'd shrugged off the shirt. The act itself was mundane, a simple shedding of fabric. But the way he'd done it, it was as if he was revealing not just his torso, but a part of himself he'd kept carefully hidden. And then, the look, that lingering, intense gaze that had held me captive. It wasn't just appreciation for the shirt, or even the gesture of lending it. It was something raw, something primal. He'd held my gaze for what felt like an eternity, and in that prolonged moment, the unspoken became deafening. He wanted me, not just as a friend, but as something more. And the terrifying, exhilarating realization was, I wanted him too. Now in the studio, the memory hung between us, a ghost in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that the shirt incident had been a turning point, a subtle but undeniable shift in the landscape of our relationship. We'd tiptoed around it ever since, the unspoken question hanging heavy in every shared glance, every accidental brush of hands. Are you sure you're okay? I asked, finally setting down the brushes. I needed to address it, or I would go mad. The ambiguity was a slow poison. Ezekiel sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken thoughts. He turned from the window, his eyes finding mine again, and this time there was a vulnerability there that I hadn't seen before. He ran a hand through his dark, unruly hair, a gesture that always made my heart skip a beat. I'm thinking about the boundaries, Ezekiel, I said, my voice softer now. The lines we draw, and the ones that get blurred. He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate, as if approaching a skittish animal. The space between us dwindled, and the air crackled with anticipation. He stopped just inches away, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough to see the faint stubble on his jaw, the subtle curve of his lips. Sometimes, he began, his voice a low rumble, the lines are there to protect us, and sometimes they're just walls we build ourselves. He paused, his gaze unwavering, searching my face for something, anything. And sometimes you meet someone, and you realize those walls are crumbling, and you're not sure if you want to rebuild them or let them fall. My breath hitched. This was it. He was talking about us. The carefully constructed platonic facade was cracking, and the raw, honest emotion was beginning to seep through. And what do you want, Ezekiel? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the question hanging in the charged air between us. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. I felt exposed, vulnerable, standing here in my own studio, the space that was usually my shield, now feeling like a stage. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze dropped, tracing the line of my jaw, the curve of my neck, a silent acknowledgement of the magnetic pull that had been growing between us for weeks. It was a look that spoke volumes, a silent confession of desires that had been simmering beneath the surface. I want to understand, he finally said, his voice deeper, rougher than before. I want to understand what's happening here, between us. His honesty was disarming. It was the vulnerability that disarmed me. The admission that he, the ever-controlled, the ever-analytical Ezekiel, was also navigating uncharted emotional territory. "And what do you think is happening?" I countered, needing him to articulate it, to give voice to the unspoken. He looked back up, his eyes locking with mine, and the intensity was almost overwhelming. "I think," he said, his voice a low, hesitant confession, "that when I took off your shirt and I saw you looking at me, I saw something I hadn't seen before, something that shook me." My own admission felt inadequate in comparison. "I saw it too," I confessed, my voice trembling slightly. "I saw it in your eyes, the want, the question." A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, unrestrained smile this time, and it illuminated his features, chasing away the shadows of uncertainty. It was the smile that had first drawn me in, the one that promised intelligence, wit, and a depth of feeling I hadn't encountered before. "So," he said, the word a soft exhalation, "we've both seen it. What do we do with it?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. It was an invitation, a challenge, a plea, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I couldn't ignore it. The walls were down. The unspoken had been spoken. I took a tentative step forward, closing the remaining distance between us. My hand, almost of its own volition, reached out, my fingers brushing against the fabric of his shirt. Not the band tee, but the one he wore now, a simple, dark gray Henley. The texture was familiar, yet intensely intimate in this context. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "But I don't think we can go back to pretending it's not there." His hand covered mine, his touch sending a jolt of heat through me. His thumb brushed gently against my knuckles, a silent reassurance, a promise of something more. "No," he agreed, his gaze unwavering. "We can't." The studio, once a familiar and safe space, now felt charged with a new kind of energy, an electric current that coursed between us. The art supplies, the canvases, the half-finished sketches, they all receded into the background, becoming mere props in the unfolding drama of our shared humanity. We stood there for a long moment, caught in the quiet intensity of the unspoken, the unraveled. The city outside continued its relentless hum, oblivious to the seismic shift happening within these four walls. The air was thick with anticipation, the promise of a future that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Then, slowly, deliberately, Ezekiel raised his other hand, his fingertips gently tracing the line of my cheekbone. His touch was feather-light, yet it sent a tremor through my entire body. His eyes, dark and full of a newfound vulnerability, searched mine, seeking confirmation, seeking permission. "Ezekiel," I breathed, the name a soft caress on my lips. It was a name that now held a new weight, a new significance. He leaned closer, his gaze never leaving mine. The scent of him, a subtle, clean fragrance, filled my senses. And then, with a slow, deliberate movement, his lips met mine. It wasn't a sudden, passionate kiss, but a tentative, exploratory one, a question asked and answered in the softest of touches. It was a kiss that spoke of burgeoning desires, of hesitant hopes, of a future that was yet to be written. It was a kiss that acknowledged the complexity of what we were navigating, the delicate balance between friendship and something far deeper. My hands, as if guided by an unseen force, moved to his waist, pulling him closer. The fabric of his shirt felt smooth beneath my palms, a stark contrast to the thrumming tension in my chest. He responded to my touch, his arm wrapping around my back, drawing me flush against him. The world narrowed to this single point of contact, this shared breath, this whispered confession of a shared desire. The kiss deepened, the initial hesitancy giving way to a more confident exploration. It was a conversation without words, a language spoken through touch and shared breath. I felt the subtle tremor in his body, the way he held me, as if afraid I might disappear. And in that moment, I knew that whatever this was, it was real. It was something we both wanted, something we both needed. When we finally broke apart, gasping for air, our foreheads rested against each other. His eyes were closed for a moment, a faint smile gracing his lips. "So," he whispered, his voice husky, "that's one way to understand." I laughed, a shaky, relieved sound. "It's a start," I agreed. He opened his eyes, and the depth of emotion I saw there sent a fresh wave of longing through me. "It's more than a start, Ezekiel," I said, my voice firm. "It's everything." He smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Everything," he echoed, and the word resonated with a promise of unspoken futures. We spent the rest of the evening not talking about art, or the city, or the mundane details of our lives. We talked about the feeling of that kiss, the tremor that ran through us both, the raw vulnerability that had been exposed. We talked, or rather, we confessed, the things we'd been afraid to voice, the fears that had held us back. He admitted that he'd been terrified of ruining our friendship, of the potential for rejection. I confessed that I'd been equally afraid of misinterpreting his intentions, of projecting my own desires onto him. We acknowledged the delicate dance we'd been doing, the careful navigation of boundaries that were, in retrospect, more like suggestions than hard lines. As the night deepened and the city lights outside began to dim, a comfortable silence settled between us. It was a different kind of silence than the one that had filled the studio earlier. This one was warm, contented, a silence of shared understanding and burgeoning intimacy. He eventually stayed the night, not in a rush, not in a fevered, impulsive act, but with a quiet understanding that this was the natural progression of things. We slept in my bed, not touching, but acutely aware of each other's presence. The space between us felt charged, but also safe, a sanctuary for our nascent emotions. The next morning, as the sun streamed through the studio windows, casting long shadows across the floor, we made coffee. The routine was familiar, yet imbued with a new layer of tenderness. He watched me pour the milk, his gaze soft and filled with a quiet contemplation. "That shirt," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "It really did start something, didn't it?" I smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "It did," I agreed. "It showed me what I wanted to see, and what you wanted me to see." He came over, his hand finding mine. His thumb traced slow circles on the back of my hand, a gesture that was both comforting and undeniably intimate. "I've been thinking about that look," he confessed, his voice low. "That look you gave me when I took it off. It was a reflection of everything I was feeling." "And what were you feeling?" I prompted, needing to hear it from him, to solidify this new reality. He turned to face me fully, his eyes serious, and full of a tenderness that made my heart ache in the best possible way. "I was feeling seen," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Truly seen, for the first time in a long time." My chest tightened with a profound sense of connection. "Me too, Ezekiel," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "Me too." The words hung in the air, a quiet affirmation of everything that had transpired. The Lent shirt, the lingering look, the hesitant kisses, they had all woven together to create this new, fragile tapestry of our relationship. The boundaries had blurred, not in a chaotic, destructive way, but in a gentle, organic unfolding. The walls hadn't crumbled. They had simply dissolved, revealing the open space where something beautiful could now grow. We were still artists, still navigating the complexities of our creative lives, but now there was an added dimension, a shared vulnerability, a whispered understanding that went beyond the canvas. The studio, once a solitary sanctuary, now felt like a shared space, a testament to the unexpected ways in which connection could bloom, often in the most ordinary of gestures, like lending a t-shirt. As the day unfolded, we moved with a new grace, a quiet understanding that flowed between us like the gentle currents of the river outside the city. The work on the gallery installation continued, but now there was a shared energy, a collaborative spirit that was more profound than any artistic endeavor we'd undertaken before. His presence beside me, the occasional brush of his hand against mine, the shared glances that held a world of unspoken promise, it all made the familiar space feel new, vibrant, and alive. The future was still unwritten, the path ahead still unfolding, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of profound peace, a quiet confidence that whatever came next, we would face it together. The Lent shirt had been the catalyst, the silent witness to a desire that had finally found its voice. And in that voice, in the shared vulnerability and nascent intimacy, I found a depth of connection I had only dared to dream of. This was no longer just about the art, it was about the artists, about the messy, beautiful, unpredictable process of falling in love. The world outside continued to spin, oblivious to the quiet revolution that had taken place within the walls of my studio. But for Ezekiel and me, everything had changed. The lines had blurred, the walls had dissolved, and in their place a garden of unspoken desires had begun to bloom, nurtured by the simple, profound act of one person seeing another and wanting more. And as I looked at him, bathed in the soft morning light, I knew with a certainty that settled deep within my soul that I wanted him too. I wanted all of him, more than I had ever wanted anything before. This was not an ending, but a beginning, a beautiful, unexpected beginning. The air in my apartment felt thicker than usual that evening. It was the kind of silence that hums with unspoken things, a palpable tension that had settled between Ezekiel and me since he'd walked back through my door. The borrowed shirt, still draped over the back of my armchair, seemed to be the focal point of the room, an innocent bystander witnessing the shifting sands of our dynamic. I'd spent the last few days replaying the moment he'd shed it, the way his eyes had lingered on mine, that flicker of something raw and unguarded that had sent a jolt through me. It wasn't just a look, not in the casual way we'd interacted before. This was different. It was a question, a challenge, an invitation all rolled into one intense gaze, and I hadn't known how to answer it, so I'd offered him a drink, steered the conversation to safer, lighter topics, and inwardly, I'd been a mess. My heart had felt like it was doing an anxious jig against my ribs, and my palms had been clammy. He'd stayed for a couple of hours, and the entire time I felt his presence acutely. Every small movement, every sigh, every subtle shift in his posture seemed to carry an amplified meaning. I found myself watching him, trying to decipher the emotions swirling behind those expressive eyes. Were my interpretations correct? Had I imagined the intensity, the longing, the almost vulnerable nakedness in his stare? The thought was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. We'd talked, of course. We'd discussed a new book I was reading, a frustrating work project I was navigating, the upcoming summer concert series, Downtown. But beneath the surface of these ordinary exchanges, a current of something else flowed, something I couldn't quite articulate, but felt with every fiber of my being. It was the unspoken acknowledgement of a shared space, a new awareness of each other that was both exciting and disorienting. When he finally left, the quiet returned, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was a quiet filled with the echo of his voice, the phantom warmth of his proximity, and the persistent, haunting memory of his gaze. I found myself wandering through my apartment, the remnants of our evening a tangible presence. I picked up the shirt he'd left behind. It still held the faint, familiar scent of his cologne, a subtle musk that was uniquely Ezekiel. I buried my face in it for a moment, a foolish, almost desperate gesture, trying to recapture the feeling of being close to him, of that electric connection. The next few days were a blur of internal debate. My mind raced, dissecting every interaction, every word, every glance. Was I reading too much into it? Was I projecting my own nascent feelings onto him? I'd always admired Ezekiel, his quiet confidence, his sharp wit, his genuine kindness. We'd formed a comfortable friendship, built on shared interests and mutual respect. But this felt like a precipice. I found myself anticipating his texts, my phone a constant companion, a source of both dread and exhilaration. When he messaged, it was usually something innocuous, a funny meme, a recommendation for a movie, a question about a shared acquaintance. And I'd reply, trying to maintain a casual tone, while inside my heart did its frantic dance. I was so afraid of misinterpreting, of making a fool of myself, of potentially ruining the easy rapport we'd established. But the memory of his stare wouldn't fade. It was like a persistent hum in the background of my thoughts, a constant reminder of the possibility of something more. I started to notice things about him differently. The way his hands moved when he spoke, the crinkling at the corners of his eyes when he genuinely laughed, the slight tilt of his head when he was deep in thought. These details, previously part of the familiar landscape of our friendship, now seemed to possess a new significance, imbued with the potential for intimacy. One afternoon, while I was at a coffee shop, my phone buzzed. It was Ezekiel. "Hey, still have your shirt? Can I return it sometime this week?" My heart leaped. A simple question, an excuse to see each other. But the underlying implication, the opportunity to revisit that charged moment, was undeniable. I typed back, my fingers fumbling slightly, "Sure, whenever works for you." The days leading up to his visit were a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. I cleaned my apartment with an almost frantic energy, as if preparing for an important guest, which, in a way, he was becoming. I agonized over what I would wear, what we would talk about, how I would navigate this renewed intimacy. The possibility of confessing my feelings, or at least hinting at them, felt both exhilarating and utterly terrifying. When he arrived, it was almost anticlimactic. He was holding the shirt, folded neatly, a neutral expression on his face. "Here you go," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. I took the shirt, my fingers brushing against his. The brief contact sent a familiar tremor through me. "Thanks," I managed, my voice a little breathy. Glad it made it back to its rightful owner. He didn't immediately turn to leave. Instead, he lingered, his gaze sweeping over my living room, then settling on me. The air once again seemed to thicken. This was it, the moment of truth. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft, a genuine concern in his tone. I nodded, trying to project a calmness I didn't feel. "Yeah, I'm good. You?" "Better now," he replied, and the way he said it, the slight emphasis on now, made my stomach do a nervous flip. He looked at me for a long moment, and I felt an almost overwhelming urge to just step closer, to bridge the small distance between us. "Look, Ezekiel," I started, my voice a little shaky, "about the other night, when you were here." He waited, his eyes fixed on mine, his expression unreadable. "That look you gave me," I continued, feeling my cheeks flush, "when you took off the shirt." I could feel the words tumbling out, clumsy and earnest. It meant something to me, I think." He didn't look away. His gaze remained steady, almost intense. A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, uninhibited smile that reached his eyes and made them crinkle. "It did mean something," he confirmed, his voice a low murmur. "It meant I wanted more of you, more of this." The directness of his admission hit me like a warm wave. All my anxieties, all my overthinking, suddenly seemed so trivial. He felt it too. He'd seen it, recognized it, and he was acknowledging it. "You mean—" I trailed off, unable to form the complete thought, my mind a whirl of possibilities. "I mean," he said, taking a small step closer, his gaze never leaving mine, "that I've been thinking about that look, and about you, A lot. More than I probably should have been. He paused, his gaze softening. You're an incredible person, Ezekiel. And that night, it felt like something shifted. It did, I whispered, the admission freeing something within me. It really did. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from my forehead. The touch was feather light, yet it ignited a fire within me. So, he said, his voice dropping to an even lower register, what do we do about it? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken promise. The silence that followed was no longer filled with anxiety, but with anticipation. It was a comfortable, expectant quiet, a prelude to a new chapter. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely audible, but my eyes held his, a silent communication passing between us. But I think I want to find out. He smiled, a slow, triumphant smile that made my heart swell. Me too. And in that moment, standing in my living room, the borrowed shirt a forgotten prop, the weight of that lingering stare finally began to lift, replaced by the exhilarating lightness of shared desire and the thrilling unknown of what was to come. The world outside my apartment faded into insignificance. There was only Ezekiel and the promise of a shared future, a future that felt, for the first time, truly within reach. The complexities, the emotional nuances, the careful dance of getting to know someone on a deeper level, it all felt less like a daunting challenge and more like an exciting adventure. We had crossed a threshold, a silent understanding now binding us. The path ahead might be uncertain, but for the first time I felt ready to walk it, hand in hand with him. The weight of that stare, which had once felt like a burden of uncertainty, had transformed into the beautiful, solid weight of a shared beginning.